let's talk about something we're not really supposed to talk about. Something that makes people shift in their seats, lower their voice, or change the subject entirely. It's the relationship between religion and mental health. Now, religion is often presented as a path to peace, to healing, to comfort in times of distress. But when you dig a little deeper, you start finding cracks beneath the surface. And those cracks can run deep into how we think, how we feel, how we relate to ourselves and others, and how we suffer. This isn't about attacking anyone's faith. It's about pulling the curtain back on something that has long gone unquestioned. Because while religion can provide comfort to some, it can also quietly damage the mental health of others in ways that are hard to talk about and even harder to recognize when you're in the middle of it. Let's start with guilt. Not just the kind you feel when you do something wrong, but the kind that gets baked into your very sense of self. In many religious frameworks, the message starts early. You are born flawed. You are inherently sinful. You carry guilt before you've even taken your first breath. That's not poetic language. That's doctrine. And when a child internalizes the idea that they're broken from the start, that doesn't build character. That builds shame. Guilt is about behavior. Shame is about identity. And religion often blurs the line between the two. You're not just someone who did something wrong. You are wrong. And that belief? It quietly corrodes self-worth. It fosters anxiety. It makes people afraid of their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own impulses, because those things are no longer just human, they're sinful. Now let's talk about fear, a constant, humming, low-grade fear of punishment. Eternal punishment. You don't get to make a mistake and learn from it. You make a mistake, and if you don't repent correctly or believe the right thing or confess at the right time, the consequences are beyond comprehension. Eternal torment, not as metaphor, but as the literal afterlife. That's what many people grow up believing, and it's hard to overstate the psychological damage that belief can do. Imagine living every day wondering if a thought, a doubt, or a question might be what tips you over into damnation. Studies on religious trauma have started to name this. It's not just anxiety, it's not just depression. It's a distinct pattern of distress. It's panic triggered by doubt. It's obsessive guilt over normal behavior. It's feeling physically sick at the thought of questioning your beliefs, because you were taught that doubt is rebellion, and rebellion is punishable. This isn't just emotional pain. It's a mental health issue created by an environment where unconditional love comes with eternal threats. Another layer to this is control. Many religious systems don't just shape what you believe, they shape how you think. Critical thinking isn't exactly encouraged. In fact, asking the wrong questions can get you branded as rebellious, prideful, or spiritually sick. So what happens to people raised in that kind of intellectual environment? They learn to suppress curiosity. They second-guess their own reasoning. And when you can't trust your own thoughts, your mental stability becomes fragile. Even more troubling is how religion often pathologizes normal human experiences. Sexual feelings, for instance, perfectly natural, biologically hardwired, are often framed as dirty, dangerous, or sinful. Young people raised in strict religious households learn to associate desire with filth. They're told that purity is a virtue and that even a stray thought is a moral failure. The result? Shame spirals, repression, self-loathing, all disguised as holiness. There's a term in psychology called scrupulosity. It's a type of obsessive-compulsive disorder centered around religious or moral fears. People afflicted by it aren't just worried about cleanliness or symmetry, they're terrified of committing a sin, even unintentionally. They check their thoughts, they repeat prayers, they confess things that aren't wrong, just in case. It's a compulsive need to feel morally clean, driven by a fear of divine judgment. And it's not rare. It happens when religious belief gets tangled with anxiety, and the result is debilitating. Now, to be fair, not all religion does this. Some traditions are more symbolic, more metaphorical, but in many parts of the world, that's not the case. The religion people grow up with isn't abstract. It's literal. It's rigid. It's policed. And the policing doesn't just come from the clergy. It comes from family, from peers, from entire communities who monitor how you speak, how you dress, who you love, what you believe, and how perfectly you obey. When you grow up in that kind of environment, you learn to perform. You learn to hide parts of yourself, to wear a mask so well that eventually you forget where the mask ends and you begin. That disconnection, that fracture between the inner self and the outer self, is where anxiety lives. It's where depression festers. You're never allowed to be fully honest, not even with yourself. And if you ever slip, you're not just wrong, you're sinful, damaged, lost. This is how religion, at its most controlling, reshapes your inner life. And it doesn't always stop when someone leaves their religion. The voices stick, the shame lingers, the wiring stays. That's why ex-religious individuals often need therapy. Not because they're broken, but because they were taught to see themselves as broken. It's a slow process to unlearn that. To heal from beliefs that were never yours to begin with, but shaped your entire identity. There's also the issue of dependency. Religion can create a psychological loop where the only source of comfort is also the source of fear. You're taught that you need God to be whole, but also that God might punish you if you don't stay faithful. That creates a kind of emotional captivity. You're afraid to leave, not because you're convinced it's true, but because you're convinced that leaving will destroy you. And this dependency gets worse in moments of crisis. When people are vulnerable, grieving, sick, lonely, that's when religious beliefs often feel the strongest. Not because they're truer, but because they promise certainty in uncertain times. They offer explanations for suffering, even if those explanations are cruel. It's God's will. Everything happens for a reason. These phrases can shut down the grieving process. They tell you not to question, not to feel too much, not to doubt. But healing requires honesty, and honesty is the one thing fear-based religion doesn't allow. Even mental illness itself can be misunderstood in religious spaces. In some communities, depression is seen as a spiritual weakness. Anxiety is blamed on a lack of faith. Psychosis might be interpreted as demonic possession. People suffering real clinical conditions are told to pray harder rather than seek therapy, medication, or professional help. The result? People stay sick. They suffer in silence, and the stigma only deepens. And then there's the isolation. If you start to question, if you speak up, if you leave, you risk losing everything. Your community, your family, your place in the world. That kind of loss can be psychologically devastating. It's not just walking away from a belief system. It's walking away from your entire support network. That fear of exile keeps many people quiet. It keeps them compliant. And it keeps them stuck in systems that may be harming their mental health every single day. None of this is about blaming individuals. Most religious people are doing what they genuinely believe is right. They're not trying to harm anyone. But good intentions don't cancel out bad outcomes. And the truth is, the structures they uphold, the dogmas, the taboos, the silence around mental health, those things can cause real, measurable harm. If someone finds meaning in their faith and it helps them live a kinder, more grounded life, that's their journey. But we have to stop pretending that religion is always a source of healing. Because for many, it's a source of trauma, of shame, of fear, and that's not something we should whisper about behind closed doors. That's something we should be willing to say, clearly, calmly, and with compassion. Belief is personal, but its consequences are not. And when belief shapes how we treat ourselves, how we raise children, how we define right and wrong, then the impact becomes public, it becomes cultural, and it becomes psychological. We can't change what we don't acknowledge, and we can't heal what we're not allowed to talk about. So we're talking about it, not to hurt, but to understand, not to shame, but to free, not to tear down, but to build something healthier in its place, because mental health matters, and belief should never be an excuse to ignore it.